The seduction and infidelity of my wife's friend. 3 years ago, my wife Courtney and I, Kevin, seemed to live for art. We weren't the least bit pretentious, at least I hope we weren't. We just liked art of just about every type. Dutch cityscapes, primitive African sculptures, pre-Columbian masks, Salvador Dali murals. We loved them all. Our house was decorated with the best originals we could afford, and we went to art shows and museums at least once a month and usually every 2 weeks. We were members of the circles of 2 nearby art galleries and attended all the private shows, openings, and galas they put on, and even traveled to New York and Washington for special exhibitions. We had many good friends who shared our interests. Although in the 8 years that Courtney and I were married, we had many other interests, albeit not as widespread as our interest in art, and other groups of friends. Our friends in the art community were our closest. In fact, with one exception, we would rather socialize with our artist friends than with anyone else. That exception was Tom's second wife, Katrina. For Tom's sake, I tried to love Katrina. However, it was very difficult. She seemed uneducated, did not appreciate classical art, including such masters as Monet and Van Gogh, and constantly made snide comments about works that other members of our group found delightful. Many times our group members discussed how Tom would get along with her or put up with her lack of sophistication. However, the men never discussed why he married her. Katrina is as hot as a sultry tropical breeze on a brisk winter day. Although her face is only slightly above average and she dresses relatively conservatively, it was impossible to hide her unrivaled breasts and hips. At the time of this story, however, Tom's patience with her simplicity seemed to have worn thin, despite her lush form. He repeatedly criticized her publicly, resulting in icy situations that required my expertise to diffuse. I am a professional mediator and negotiator, and I really enjoy transferring my work experience to my personal life. However, when it came to Tom and Katrina, even though my actions to diffuse tensions always worked in the end, I never received any acknowledgement from them, let alone gratitude, even though the rest of our group expressed their appreciation. Despite my misgivings about Katrina, I was always pleasant to her, and she to me in one-on-one situations, although such encounters were infrequent. I had known Katrina for about 3 years when the occasion for this story arose. The largest local art gallery was hosting a 50th anniversary gala featuring an exhibition of Jean Miro paintings and rare lithographs collected from around the world, including the original of perhaps his most famous painting under the ridiculously titled Sculptures. This gallery was also renowned for offering unrivaled food and drink every time it hosted a soiree, and this event promised to be the best ever. I was looking forward to attending this event. About a week before the event, Katrina called Courtney. Apparently, she was in a deplorable mood. Tom was going to be out of town on business. The event was on Wednesday night, which he couldn't refuse, but for some reason, Katrina really wanted to attend. According to Courtney, Katrina struck her with the phrase, "I know most of our band members think I'm a simpleton and a nerd, but I'm struggling to fit in, and you and Kevin are the most tolerant of me. Would you mind if I gave you 2 a ride?" Sure, Courtney replied, not knowing what to say. This obviously made Katrina very happy. Kevin," Courtney said to me shortly afterward with a sheepish expression on her face. "That was Katrina. Tom's going out of town for the 50th anniversary gala and she wanted to give me a ride. I couldn't say no to her." "That's ridiculous," I muttered. "Looks like I'm going to have to take a few patience pills or get really intoxicated or both." "Don't be so glum," Courtney grinned. "She spoke well of us and said she's trying her best to fit in and learn more about the arts. Miro should make a great teacher." "Really?" I asked cynically, raising an eyebrow. "Be nice," Courtney laughed, then poked me in the ribs. I was about to get used to the idea of Courtney and I taking turns socializing with Katrina at the gala when another shoe dropped on me a few days later. "Kevin, honey," Courtney purred. Whenever she said honey or said darling, it meant I wasn't going to like what she said next. What? I replied with a jaundiced look. You know how much I want to go to the gala? But there's been some problems at work, and I'm going to have to be out of town Wednesday through Friday late at night to make my career. I'm sorry, she said, stroking my chest with her finger. The first question that popped into my head was, Is John Bates going on this trip? I asked in an unpleasant voice. Yes, along with 2 other people, she answered awkwardly. However, she quickly pulled herself together and said in a joking tone, though I didn't find it funny, Why are you always so worried about him? Because he's figuratively, I hope not literally, but I don't know for sure, sniffing your body all the time, that's why, I replied firmly. Oh, Kevin, you're misinterpreting everything. Really, Courtney, then why does he always try to slow dance with you whenever there's an event at your company? Or that time we saw him and his supposed girlfriend at Passion Fruit nightclub? How did he know we were there? We've discussed this many times, she said, somewhat irritated. It was just a coincidence, and he dances with other people as well. Only quick dances. Besides, I didn't like his remark the other day when I told him I only do slow dances with you, I growled. He was just kidding, she giggled. I didn't think it was funny, I replied. Oh, honey, don't be jealous, she cooed. You know you're much better looking than he is. I did think I was much better looking, and I knew I could punish him with one hand behind his back, but I also knew that women in general, and Courtney in particular, didn't treat looks the same way men did. Her last boyfriend, before we'd gotten married 7 years ago, had looked a lot like John, and she'd apparently been in love with him before he'd foolishly dumped her and then tried unsuccessfully to win her back. Still angry, I asked, Do you really need to go on this trip? Yes, honey, I do. You can call Brad if you don't believe me, she replied conciliatorily, stroking my chest again. Brad was the CEO of her company and an honest man. I grumbled to myself as Courtney hugged me. Then a whole new problem popped into my brain. I gently pulled Courtney back at arm's length and mouthed, Are you going to call Katrina and tell her she can't come with us because you're not going? Why would I do that? Asked Courtney, after a slight pause and a perplexed look on her face. You're going anyway, aren't you? She can still go with you, can't she? I was counting on you to take the load off me in dealing with her vague questions and behavior, and now I have to do it alone? I grumbled. Our other friends will be there. Be a gentleman, Kevin. Like I said, she's trying to change. It might be fun. Yeah, probably, I moaned. You're all worked up, aren't you? Courtney smirked. Let me calm your frayed nerves, she continued, massaging my shoulders. I knew she was toying with me, but since I thought it was going to something good, I agreed. I continued to grumble under my breath until she started caressing my body, looking at me with a provocative expression on her face. Then I began to make love to her. When we were fully recovered, I picked her up in my arms, took her to the shower, and after a session of groping, giggling, and carrying her to our bed, I made love to her again. After that, she fell fast asleep on my shoulder. Sleep didn't come easily to me. I was still angry about her business trip with John and the fact that I had to deal with Katrina alone, since I was sure our friends would be of little help. Eventually, I sank into an anxious slumber. I was concerned enough to call Brad 2 days later, after all. I knew him well from corporate events and had even played doubles tennis with him a couple times when his usual partner couldn't make it during tournaments at his country club. I tried not to be too nosy or obvious, and I think I mostly succeeded, as I started the conversation by asking him if he knew how to get tickets to the next match at the local World Team Tennis Club. I confirmed that Courtney does need to go on that trip, but only she and John would be going. No one else. However, that decision had been made recently, so maybe she wasn't lying. But I was still angry. I did my best to make love to Courtney to the point of passing out on Tuesday night before her trip the next morning. She had complained a little, but it seemed more in jest than in reality, so I decided to suppress my irritation about her and John being alone together for 2 nights. Besides, now I had another unsettling situation to deal with, driving Katrina to the gala alone. I called Katrina around noon on Wednesday, hoping that I could decline to go to the gala with her, although I still planned to go. But she was so enthusiastic about the event that I'd have to be a real asshole to refuse to go. I so want to see the Miro exhibit with someone knowledgeable who won't constantly put me down like Tom does, she purred at one point. I braced myself for a challenging evening, but vowed to make the most of it. The event was organized in black tie style, so I was in a tuxedo. When I picked Katrina up, she was elegantly dressed in an electric blue strapless, sleeveless, backless, shoulderless floor-length dress with a slit almost to the hip on the left side. A bold sapphire necklace adorned her neck, and a discreet sapphire bracelet encircled her left wrist. "You look gorgeous," I said honestly as I helped her slip the pashmina over her bare shoulders for the trip to the gallery. "Thank you, you're the most beautiful penguin I've ever seen," she giggled in response. The small talk on the way to the gallery was a little forced, but once we got there, ate a few oysters, shrimp, and vegetables each, and drank 2 glasses of wine, our conversation flowed much more smoothly. As we toured the Miro exhibit, Katrina was full of intemperate questions and comments. Katrina was not overly impressed with Grain Spike, an early work by Miro. "It looks like a bad still life to me," Katrina grinned, finishing her second glass of white wine. "They don't serve red in the galleries." "I'll probably need another glass if they all look like this," she grinned, holding out her glass. There was humor in her words, and since I don't like grainier either, I grinned back and brought her another glass. When I caught up with her, she was looking thoughtfully at a beautiful bird, revealing the unknown to a pair of lovers. "Thank you, Kevin," she purred, touching my hand lingeringly as she carefully moved the glass from mine to hers. "It's a very intense work. I can't understand why it's like this," she stated. "He painted this picture when he and his family were fleeing the Nazis." "Wow," Katrina giggled. She then remained thoughtful for a while longer before remarking, "I can see that. Thanks, Kevin, you're a genius." I laughed. She gave me a sincere and spontaneous hug. I actually had a pretty good time playing the role of tour guide for Katrina while we toured the rest of the collection. Most of her comments, instead of being silly or ridiculous, were humorous or thought-provoking, and some were even insightful. This, despite the fact that I brought her 4th glass of wine. Katrina's best comments were saved for last, to a Miro composition called Motherhood. "Is that really a woman?" giggled Katrina after looking at the work for a couple minutes, taking a sip of her 4th glass of wine. "Yes, it is," I grinned. "It's obviously very sketchy, reduced to its simplest form." "So it's supposed to be one breast in profile and the other straight on, with 2 stick figures of children floating in the air?" She laughed, pointing to the objects in the work. "That's what the experts say," I grinned back. "I suppose she has a pretty good rack even if she is anorexic," Katrina smirked. "But I have to say, I can show you some artwork in my house that is much more aesthetically pleasing than this." "They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder," I cliched. "Yes, but the pieces of art I can show you in my home will seem far more beautiful and dramatic than anything in this collection," she grinned. We met up with a few of our friends and had a very pleasant conversation, in which Katrina participated enthusiastically and winked at me every time she repeated one of my remarks. By 9:30, everyone had dispersed. Katrina went to powder her nose, and I called Courtney's cell phone in the alcove. Cell phone use in the gallery is frowned upon, if not forbidden, so I had to be in a secluded, out-of-reach place. At least I tried calling Courtney. My call went straight to voicemail. I left a cheerful message telling her that the night had been fun, not the complete disaster I feared, and asked her to call me no matter what time it was. On the drive home, it was clear that Katrina felt no pain, though she was also clearly not so drunk that she had no control over her faculties. I was very surprised by one of her first remarks about the trip. "I may not have told you this before, Kevin, but I have you to thank for all the times you saved me from embarrassing situations when Tom made derogatory remarks. I really appreciate it," she said, squeezing my bicep as she finished. "Yeah, hoped I was helpful," I stammered, slightly taken aback by the sincerity of her remark. She continued earnestly. "I also have to thank you for being so nice to me tonight. I bet you were looking forward to it with trepidation, but I hope it wasn't too awful for you." Again, I stuttered a little as I replied, "Actually, I had fun today. I hope you had a good time." At that moment, the bright headlights of a passing car reflected off her azure eyes and sapphire necklace at the same time, a truly exotic sight. "I had a wonderful time," she cooed, eagerly showing off her pearly whites. As we pulled up to her house, she took my right hand and nonchalantly asked, "Would you like to see what I have in my house of art, which by all accounts deserves more praise than Miro's motherhood?" It was a little after 10 o'clock at night, and I never went to bed before midnight, even on weekdays. "Of course," I replied. "Let me get the door for you." I hurried to the passenger side of the car and opened the door for Katrina, taking her hand gently so she could get out of the car more easily. The part of her dress defining the slit had come apart, revealing a left thigh that was even more desirable than what I had been able to see in my previous, subtle inspections of her body. I helped her grab her keys. She closed the living room curtains and then apologized. "I have to make a stop before I show you the art I'm so proud of," she smiled. "Can I get you something to drink?" "I think I've had enough to drink at the gala," I replied. "I still have a drive home to make." "Oh, don't worry. You'll be completely sober by then. If you change your mind, the bar is over there," she said, pointing to a small bar between the living room and the kitchen. "I'll be right back," she said, and disappeared somewhere in the back of the first floor. I walked around the living room, looking at the paintings on the wall, and made another call to Courtney's cell phone. It went to voicemail again. I left a short message. "Call me." I was a little taken aback, but I shrugged and continued looking at the compositions on the walls. I had only been to Tom's house once when he was married to his first wife. It seemed like most of the paintings had changed since then. I liked some of them, but none were good enough to enthrall me. Certainly nothing that was much more beautiful and dramatic than Miro's work, as Katrina had promised at the gallery. She must be getting a painting or sculpture out of her bedroom. My mind drifted haphazardly through my head as I continued to look at the wall display cases in the living room. Then I heard a noise to my left. I turned to look just as Katrina walked into the living room, smiling. She was wearing high-heeled shoes, a sapphire necklace, and a sapphire ankle bracelet, and nothing else. Lucky I didn't grab a drink from the wet bar because I would have dropped it for sure. "Now tell me honestly, Kevin, is this a work of art? And is it more beautiful and spectacular than anything you've seen in marble or on canvas?" she asked rhetorically, moving her hands defiantly, smoothly rotating, eventually rotating all 360 degrees. I was stunned, speechless, and dumbfounded. There was no doubt in my mind that Katrina's body was the best I had ever seen, live or in the media. Her skin at 32 was as firm and smooth as an 18-year-old's, and her breasts were just as firm but with enough sag to claim them as natural. As Katrina struck a pose with one leg in front of the other, knees slightly bent and hands on her hips, she smirked. "So how do you like my art? Better than anything in the gallery?" I think I mumbled something like, "Yeah, sure." But since my circuits were overloaded at that moment, I don't know exactly. "One thing you can be sure of. This is going to give you a lot more pleasure than anything you've encountered before," she hummed, heading towards me. Once she was a couple feet away from me, Her smile became even more smug as she looked and then touched my body. "I guess that means you really like what you see, art lover," she purred as she gently took my hand. I honestly don't know exactly how what happened next happened, and I don't know what went through my head, if it was anything other than animal desire. I don't know if I was thinking about Courtney or why my calls were going to voicemail. I don't know if visions of Tom were running through my brain. I honestly don't believe I was consciously thinking about anything other than having sex with Katrina. I distinctly remember that shortly after she grabbed my hand, she was lying on the living room couch while I was kneeling in front of her. I moved her to the couch and started having sex with Katrina. It was my first sex with another woman since I had met Courtney. I couldn't believe how good it felt for me. After a wonderful 9 a.m. breakfast of blueberry pancakes and sausage patties that Katrina had made and served naked, my brain started working again for the first time since the gala ended. Many questions swirled around in my head. Why Courtney never called me back? How lucky Tom was, but why he didn't appreciate the work of art in front of me, and how I could have the best love experience of my life with someone I had previously had a negative opinion of. If I didn't have an important mediation starting at 11 a.m. and the need to go home and change into a tuxedo, I would have stayed until morning. "Katrina, can you have dinner with me tonight?" "I think we have some things to discuss," I said, pushing myself away from the table. My stomach was now almost as full as my libido. "I can make us dinner here," she said with a smile. "Let me take you out. When's your day off?" "You exhausted me, asshole," she laughed. "And I have a flexible schedule, so I'm taking the day off." "How about 6 p.m.?" I asked. "Pick me up then," she snorted. "Hopefully you'll be able to stay the night again." "That's one of those things we'll talk about," I smiled. We exchanged fervent kisses at her door before leaving. Courtney ended up making a very awkward call on my cell phone around 10:50 a.m., just as I was getting ready to leave for a mediation I was conducting. I told her I couldn't talk, but didn't ask why she hadn't called me the night before, which seemed to calm her down somewhat. I asked her to call me that evening. Despite the lack of sleep, I was very awake during the meditation. Perhaps the testosterone and endorphins that were still raging in my system were to blame. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I had successfully negotiated a deal that satisfied both parties, and even managed to take a hot shower and nap for an hour before I picked up Katrina. When I picked Katrina up, she was wearing a yellow sundress that looked like it was made just for her. She hissed and hugged my bicep as we walked to the car. As we pulled up to the restaurant, she giggled, lifted up her dress, and pinched my cheek as my eyes got as big as saucers. At dinner, we talked about everything but art. I was surprised at how well versed she was in music, tennis, and hockey. She had been a violin prodigy as a child, but her career was cut short by a severe injury sustained while playing women's hockey when she was a teenager. When she recovered, she learned to play the piano, but gave up her aspirations for a professional music career. In college, she took an interest in event planning and is now quite successful at it. As we walked back to her house, she squeezed my hand tightly as I walked her to the door. "We have many more topics to talk about that we didn't get to talk about at the restaurant," she smiled. Then she laughed and continued. "Come into my living room," said the spider to the fly. Once we were in her living room, she sat down next to me on the couch and took my hands in hers. "Kevin, I have a confession to make to you. I seduced you. I've wanted to for a long time, but I never got the chance until last night. I'll be perfectly honest. I want to get rid of Tom, and I want to be with you, especially after last night, when you rocked my world like you never have before." She stunned me again. I didn't know if my feelings for her, which had flipped 180 degrees in 24 hours, were real or sustainable, but I wanted to find out. "Can you take tomorrow off from work?" I asked. "I can if that's what you want," she grinned. "Let's do another 20-hour or so compatibility check," I said, gently pulling the top of her dress down to her waist. We didn't have sex that night, but we did make love twice. We also spent several hours examining each other's bodies, identifying areas, some of which we didn't realize we had. Friday afternoon, we attended a dress rehearsal for a concert, where it became obvious that when it came to music, I was the neophyte and Katrina was the expert. My phone was on the whole time. Courtney never called. As Katrina and I parted late Friday night, I said, "I have a lot to think about. How about you?" "I have to play the underdog at least a little bit," she grinned, "but I don't have anything to think about. I'll just have to wait to see what you think." When I got home early Friday night, Courtney was already there. There was an expression on her face that I couldn't decipher, something between thoughtfulness, puzzlement, and fear. "Where have you been?" she asked. "At Katrina's house." "Oh, why?" "I think she wants to end her marriage to Tom." "Have you talked to her about it?" "Yes. By the way, I never heard from you during the trip. Was there any trouble?" "Oh, well, we've been really busy, sorry, but, it went really well. We got the contract we wanted, so I'm sure Brad will be happy. Look, there are probably some things we need to talk about." "You're right, but let's leave them until tomorrow." We spent the rest of the evening in idle conversation over dinner, watched a movie on TV, and then, with less passion than I ever remembered, had sex when we got into bed. The contrast between sex with Courtney and what it had been like with Katrina couldn't have been more stark. Saturday morning, I biked 30 miles and Courtney went to her fitness club. We met at home for lunch, showered, and then sat down together. Honey, something happened while I was gone," she began. "Yes, of course it happened," I hummed. The next 4 months weren't pleasant, but at least Katrina and I had never been more determined than during that time. Courtney and Tom seemed to waver between trying to make a relationship work and giving up on the marriage. But Katrina and I put an end to their hesitation by getting an apartment and moving in together 6 weeks after the gala. Once the divorces were finalized and Courtney and Tom bought out our shares in the houses, Katrina and I bought a house together and were soon married. I don't know about Courtney and Tom, but I never looked back. Now, 3 years after gala, I'm still living the dream. Every night I snuggle up to a living, breathing, unrivaled work of art, and I couldn't be happier. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.